Mercedes' admission that they got it wrong with the zero-pod design eventually ruined their season, but they still can end it as the second best side. Things, however, are looking a bit brighter for the next one, as statements have come out recently that the Brackley side found their so-called sweet spot for where the car should be next season. So, could this prove to be game-changing in the title race, and could Mercedes actually catch Red Bull? Now, since the introduction of ground effect cars at the beginning of the 2022 season, the German manufacturer has encountered difficulties. Last year's W13 had problems with porpoising, making the team struggle with a narrow window for ride height within which the car could generate downforce. The car was essentially forced to operate close to the ground, leading to two major issues: the risk of bouncing with increased downforce levels and the need for stiff suspension. This stiffness made the car prone to problems on uneven surfaces and curbs. With the W14 for the current year, Mercedes aimed to achieve downforce across a wider range of ride heights, facilitated by a 15mm increase in the floor edges by the FIA. However, Mercedes' overly cautious approach with ride height meant they operated at a higher ride height than other teams, leaving performance potential untapped. The changes weren't going to fully eliminate bouncing, but would ease the issue and prevent potential long-term damage to drivers. As Allison explained, Mercedes had to make a decision over the winter: either take an aggressive approach, trading off bouncing protection for performance, or choose a more cautious route to avoid the porpoising that ruined their previous season. They opted for caution, though this decision was later discovered to be overly conservative, necessitating corrective measures. Although we made great strides last year, 2023 presented all the teams with a rule change that offered some protection against bouncing, he explained. Over the winter, we faced a choice: go aggressive and trade the bouncing protection in the rule change for performance, or take a more cautious route and steer clear of the sort of porpoising that wrecked our season last year. We chose the cautious path, knowing that it would be less painful to correct if we were wrong. The story of our year so far has been mostly about finding out that we had been too cautious and making the changes to correct that. Well, the problem of porpoising has haunted Mercedes in this new era and continues to affect them even with their careful approach. This was evident at Spa, where George Russell expressed disappointment that many teams still struggle with bouncing. Mercedes Chief Technical Officer Mike Elliott believes the bouncing was likely due to the setup or the circuit, but it shows that the issue of porpoising has not been entirely addressed by Mercedes, even with their winter caution. Allison's approach may have reduced the W14's performance potential, possibly contributing to Mercedes' inability to compete with the dominant Red Bull. There were high expectations for the significant upgrade package unveiled at the Monaco Grand Prix, but the team remains well behind the RB19, and this was demonstrated by Lewis Hamilton finishing nearly 50 seconds behind Max Verstappen at Spa, even though he started 3 places ahead of him on the grid. So it's clear that 2023 is a lost year for Mercedes, and there are already indications that the team is utilising this season as a testing ground for 2024. The bodywork packages, such as the one brought to Spa, are more about collecting data for the upcoming W15 than significantly enhancing the performance of the current W14. At this stage of the year, the wind tunnel is heavily focused on 2024, Allison confirmed. Large chunks of the drawing office, vehicle dynamics, manufacturing for long lead time production items are starting to gather their skirts. From the summer break onwards, next year's car is where the largest call is answered, but that also gives opportunities for the W14 too. So what adjustments does Mercedes need to make for next year's vehicle? The team has evidently stumbled in various areas, and their understanding of the current regulations appeared to be less comprehensive than before, a deficiency highlighted by Red Bull's superior performance. Mercedes' Mike Elliott disclosed that they explored different bodywork designs, including side pod experiments during the off-season, but found no improvements. Consequently, they opted for zero pods, only to discover that this design fell short once the racing began. Although they achieved some progress in simulations, translating these gains to the track has proven challenging. The current focus is on harnessing airflow around the car's sides to seal the floor and run it close to the ground, maximizing downforce. However, this tactic created issues with the W13, which performed well in simulations but encountered problems like porpoising on the track, resulting in a performance loss that was challenging for drivers to handle. Substantial gains were achieved by the team in the simulator, but not all of them have been translated onto the track. The current challenge involves utilizing the airflow around the car's side pods and sides to seal the floor and run the car as low to the ground as feasible. This, in theory, the essence of making a ground effect car function by running it as close to the ground to enhance downforce from the floor. However, this method led to issues, as the W13 performed well in simulation but proved to be too low on the track, leading to porpoising and loss of performance. This problem was challenging for the drivers to handle. The suspension has been a primary subject of discussion, an area where Red Bull seems to have a considerable edge. They've configured their suspension with anti-dive and anti-squat settings to keep the car almost perfectly level, enabling them to maintain downforce without the need to stiffen the car. James Allison detailed that all teams aim to shield against bouncing during the winter, facing a decision to be either aggressive and potentially solve the porpoising while maximizing performance, or to be more cautious to steer clear of the significant bouncing problems that plague the W13. Mercedes conceded that they erred on the side of caution, resulting in an overly conservative car, and are now attempting to correct their winter mistakes. Mercedes' statements, however, might indicate a lack of understanding of the current regulations, as they may have fallen into the trap of running the car too low. This is something that Red Bull seemed to grasp from the onset. Their focus on the suspension proved more advantageous than a conventional stiff setup, giving Red Bull an edge without the issues Mercedes faced. This puts Mercedes behind, possibly by 2 years in some aspects, a position they certainly don't want, especially with plans to catch up by 2026 when regulations shift again. Mercedes, along with Mike Elliott, have asserted their belief that they're now correctly positioned for the winter. Limiting testing opportunities mean they must make decisive choices about ride height without extensive wind tunnel experimentation. They feel they now know the right approach, possibly by adjusting the ride height or the suspension itself, but they acknowledge that they haven't quite perfected it yet. Although Mercedes has spoken optimistically about determining the ideal ride height, recent evidence from Belgium shows that they haven't quite nailed it with their current upgrades. This misstep proved expensive in Belgium, particularly in contrast to Red Bull, who once again had the fastest car. What raises concerns about Mercedes is their continuous pursuit of the perfect ride height, disregarding that different tracks require varying heights. Designing a car that excels within a specific ride height window can result in failure the moment that the height is altered. This has also affected their zero pod concept. The revolutionary potential of the concept was widely discussed, but it turned out to be unfeasible as the required window was too narrow to utilize effectively. I think the floor rule change of last year hurt everyone else except Red Bull more, primarily because they as a team is just doing a better job overall. It's always better if rules are the same, as teams can guess better what their competitors can do and appropriately aim higher. In fact, lap time wise, the RB19 is not monumentally quicker than the RB18. It was around 1 second a lap quicker, which frankly is standard comparing Bahrain 2022 to Bahrain 2023. What other teams including Mercedes, Ferrari failed to achieve was the same gains as Red Bull. I believe here is where the rule change hurt them, as the Austrian team managed to find 1 second with the rule change, and others probably felt that the reigning champions would lose some time there. Given their end of season gaps of 0.3 to Mercedes, an estimated 0.5 slowdown thanks to the rules, it all checks out that Mercedes Ferrari were about 0.5 to 1 second slower than Red Bull in race trim. Now Mercedes have clearer goals, better understanding of what the Austrians are doing, and can approach the problem with more focus. There were articles flying around that Mercedes has always had this philosophy of making a car with the highest peak downforce possible, and then engineering the problems away. That just hasn't worked with these new cars, it seems. But then again, they're a multiple World Championship winning team, so they should be able to figure something out. So, do you think Mercedes really did figure it out? Let us know your thoughts and opinions in the comments below, and we'll see you in the next one.